All right, guys, welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be doing our 2022 preview and prediction for the South Carolina Gamecocks. Nick, Shaheen Bell comes in and instantly makes an impact in his first year. Went 7-6. Marcus Satterfield, Clayton White, they're back for the coordinator for the second season in a row. You know, I love Shaheen Bell. A lot of the coaches do too. They get 15 starters back. They also added a number of transfers, a few of them coming from Oklahoma, where he previously was. Obviously, they love him. He's a player's coach. He's from the area. This seems to be a perfect fit, top to bottom. And, you know, considering how good he was last year, the sky's the limit this year for Shaheen Bell and the Gamecocks.
I love Shaheen Bell. I think he's a perfect fit in Columbia. You know, South Carolina exceeded expectations by and large last year, winning a bowl game and finishing above 500. What a turnaround they did in Columbia, and I think Shaheen Bell is a perfect fit. Honestly, if things had fallen the right way at Oklahoma, he could have taken over and been the head coach there for me. He's that talented of a coach and that so young and energetic. Of course, the son of former Virginia Tech legend Frank Beamer, who's coaching there for a very long time. I love Shaheen Bell. I think he's a great fit. Players, coach, they love him. People rave about playing under him, and I think he's the right guy to lead South Carolina for the next 10 plus years in the SEC East.
And he was a coach there for about 4 or 5 years in the late 2000s. So Shaheen Bell obviously comes back for a second stint to be the lead man. They love him. And we'll get to this offense. 8 starters are back. Not bad, you know, to win 7 games last year, despite really not having a quarterback. Luke Dottie was a former high-end recruit. He didn't perform very well last year. This passing game was not with it. Guess what? They had Spencer Rattler. And, of course, everyone has an opinion on this guy. He really struggled with decision-making last year, attitude at times. Overall command of the offense last year was just poor. He still completed 75% of his passes, but, again, only 165 yards per game, 11-5 TD to INT ratio. Wasn't bad. He struggled. Caleb Williams got the job and ran away with it. Rattler's here at South Carolina. What do you make of this guy, considering a year ago from today he was the Heisman favorite? Now he's at another destination looking to prove their doubters wrong.
Spencer Rattler certainly has the talent. You know, the talent is there. The raw talent is certainly there. He's such a talented quarterback, but just the work ethic and decision making on the field seems to lack at times. If he can get his head on straight, focus on the game, focus on decision making, you know, does not make the mistakes he needs to make. He looked poor in that game against Tulane last year for Oklahoma, and eventually Caleb Williams took over, like you said, and just absolutely ran away with the offense. There was no looking back for Rattler. But considering how much hype this guy had, former Heisman frontrunner, you know, super popular name in high school recruiting, and then just doesn't really work out at Oklahoma, ends up jumping ship and heads to South Carolina. I think this is a perfect fit for him. I think this is a great place for him to restart. I think he fits in great with this offense. They'll design it around him. I think they have a really high potential here with Rattler.
People forget he had 3,000 yards, about 30 touchdowns 2 years ago in his debut year for Oklahoma. Made a lot of plays out of the pocket. You know, he's still trying to understand how pocket. So I think reuniting here with Shaheen Bell, this is a guy that's going to keep him straight, keep his head on his shoulders. I thought that he was potentially going to go back home and play for Arizona State, and Herm Edwards, another guy that would help in those specific categories. But here he is at South Carolina, a very talented ball player. You can have an opinion on, but the upside is there. That is undeniable. You know, looking at this running game, though, they only average 136 yards per game on the ground. Didn't get Kevin Harris involved early in the year. I think he was battling an injury or something. You know, he also wasn't very efficient, which in 2020 he had like 1,400 yards or something. So the offensive line, I think, was a bigger struggle than it was Kevin Harris last year because he could not replicate. I don't think it was his doing.
Yeah, you know, it's definitely tough when you have a poor offensive line in front of you, and it was difficult for him to kind of get comfortable for Kevin Harris. The 4.3 yards per carry is just really not what you wanted to see out of Harris. A bit disappointing for him, but I think this running game can definitely take a step forward with the transition they're making. I think Marshawn Lloyd is a solid back. He should step up and be a solid back for the South Carolina Gamecocks, like what he can do in the limited appearances he got last year.
The top 2 rushers depart, Harris included. Marshawn Lloyd, like you said, a former high-end recruit, powerful runner that makes plays in the hole. Used in limited action after a torn ACL in 2020, but he's back and should be full health. Also at Christian Beal-Smith. You know, what happened last year when Wake Forest back transferred to a Power 5 school? He won the Doak Walker Award. So can Christian Beal-Smith do the same thing? Probably not, but this is a guy that's been very productive, kind of like Kenneth Walker was, 5'10", 201. A little bit smaller, a little bit more on the smaller side, about 1,800 yards, 14 touchdowns in his career. He also got Jojo Mcdonald. He used a good bit early in the year. Not much at all late in the year. 4.7 yards per carry. He's also their best pass catching back. So they now have a nice little 3-headed monster here in the running game. The offensive line, they get everyone back. No added transfer. So Shaheen Bell, I think he's settling with this group and he's ready to let these guys loose and just progress. Eric Douglas at center. Jalen Nichols at left tackle. Marshawn Lee, he could play left guard or right tackle. Some of the longer tenured vets here. 85th nationally in sacks allowed. This unit needs to be better in all areas, Nick. a very inexperienced group last year. I think was a big reason why, and that's why they didn't add any transfers. I think Beamer believes in these guys. What do you make of the two backs I just mentioned on top of Lloyd and then this offensive line?
McDonald, I think, is a solid guy. I like to see him involved in the passing game early on. And Smith Beal, had a decent career. Transfers over here. I think he has a lot of potential. I think he has a solid career at Wake Forest. I don't think he's going to blow up quite like Kenneth Walker, but the potential certainly is there for him to have a solid season in the SEC. And on the offensive line, I trust Beamer. I think Beamer trusts these guys as well. Bringing them all back, not changing anything. I love the experience. All these guys get some new experience. The youngest in terms of classification on the roster is a junior, and the starting offensive line is a junior. At left guard, in general, I think these guys will get better since they'll just continue to get reps with each other. I love the cohesion. I love the fact that they've been together as a unit and they can stay together. I think they'll be able to build off what they had last year.
Now, I was a bit worried about this pass-catching group early in the offseason. Not exactly why. I think the depth had me a little worried, but I am not now after a successful offseason. Of course, they get the top two pass catchers back in Josh Van. He's got really good hands. Quite physical for being 6 foot tall. Tad bit undersized, but again, that's not really a concern. Some solid separation skills. He was the leading pass catcher last season. Jaheem Bell, the add of Austin Stockton from Oklahoma, allows him to move the wide receiver. He's a dynamic athlete who's 6'3", 230. And I'm thinking he could have a Kyle Pitts type of year, Nick. What do you make of Jaheem Bell, and what are your expectations for him this fall?
I like Jaheem Bell, solid guy. I think he has some serious potential. I love the way they also picked up Stunger as well. I think he's a very solid tight end. Nice transfer to pick up. Bell, almost 500 yards receiving last year, 16.6 yards per catch, 5 touchdowns. I love what he can possess on the field.
And now, looking at these added guys, Corey Rucker, very good production over the last 2 years. In 18 games, he has 75 grabs, 1,200 yards, and 14 touchdowns. Not bad for a guy who showed up and instantly had an impact at Arkansas State, a pretty poor Group of 5 team at this moment in time. Good numbers, but guess what? Wells did that alone in this past season. 1,200 yards, 15 touchdowns. He did that in 2021 alone. He comes over from James Madison and Juan Wells. I love the added depth of these guys. DeCarrion Joyner, he's also a former quarterback, with plenty of athleticism, but hasn't exactly showed off too many skills. But, he's still new to the position here at wide receiver, and I think that I really love the role he's going to have this season. Really good. I think he's really going to be the one that benefits most.
I like Wells Jr. I think he's a solid player, plays in that wide receiver Z role. I think that's a solid fit for him. I love the way that he comes over from James Madison. Solid player at the FCS level. Program that, of course, is a solid FCS program that's transitioning to FBS shortly. I like Rucker as well. Solid career across the board. Arkansas State, which is a pretty poor Arkansas State team. I think he has potential to be a bit of a rotational guy, can get some good grabs early on in the season, hopefully.
Austin Stockton, of course, we just mentioned him. He had 4 receptions per game in 2020. He has that recently built chemistry of Rattler and Beamer, so of course that's another added piece to this offense. The USC Trojans out west clearly improved the most on offense due to the portal, but I think this SC is probably right behind them, Nick. 104th in scoring offense last year. I think they're easily going to crack the top 30 this fall. How do you feel?
Totally agree. They did a great job in the portal. I think people want to play for Beamer. It was easy for him to grab guys. I think Stonger is a very underrated pickup. I think the connection with him and Rattler, they work together well. He has great experience at Oklahoma. I think he'll be easily a step up and could be a huge play at tight end for them. And across the board, I love what they have with this production on offense, with the way they made these moves. Wells Jr. is a very underrated player coming up from the FCS level. He should be in for a huge season.
Now looking at this defense, they returned 7 starters. They went from 36 points per game allowed to only 24 this past season, which is quite shocking considering they hired an offensive-minded head coach. But he was able to bring energy. So I'm a big fan of this D-line. They haven't exactly blossomed. Jordan Birch, Zach Pickens, 2 former 5-stars that have really not developed like you would imagine. They are now veterans at this point. This team really struggled to stop the run, Nick. They were a complete demise against Clemson late in the year. They got absolutely bodied. They were 94th in college football, with 175 yards per game on the ground allowed. They gave up 230 plus rushing yards 5 times, all versus strong SEC ground attacks. They're going to have to progress on this tremendously. How do you think they're going to do it? Because they have the talent, but these guys have just not showed up yet. And this is going to be a big area for them, because if you cannot stop the run in the SEC, you're not going to win football games.
I'm certainly concerned with their run-stopping ability. It was absolutely atrocious last year, like you alluded to in the Clemson game. They got ran all over by what was a pretty poor Clemson team on all regards. I like Jordan Birch. I think he has some serious talent, former 5-star. He had an interception last year, 2.5 tackles for loss, plus a sack. Like what he can do. And when you look at a guy like Zach Pickens, a lot was expected of him, high-end recruit. Last year, for loss, 4 sacks, 38 total tackles. He's got to double those numbers this year if he really wants to be productive for this team. Alex Huntley as well returns 11 total tackles last year. He had very limited experience in 8 games. These guys have to find a way to step up, because if they start giving up running game early, some of these teams will trample over them and they'll find themselves in a deep hole.
Now they do lose Kingsley and Egbar. on this pass rush. I think that this group progressed pretty nicely last year. They went up from about less than 1.5 sacks per game to over 2 this year, or 2 exactly, rather. I think Jordan Birch, again, a guy who's going to really step up this year. I think he's going to blossom quite well. And then Jordan Strawn, this guy led the nation in sacks in 2020. I remember playing basketball with him my freshman year of high school. Now he's expected to be a high-end producer for South Carolina off the edge. Do you think this pass rush is going to get better? Or you think with Kingsley moving on to the NFL, they're going to struggle?
It's definitely tough to replace Kingsley. He was a solid player. Both you and I raved about him during the draft process. I really liked him a whole lot. He ends up leaving and getting to greener pastures. Solid player with 7 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks last year. But I think this pass rush will definitely have production ability. I think they're very solid across the board. And I think some of these guys will step up and make some big plays. They got to the quarterback a fair amount last year. They have a decent amount of sacks, but I think they'll be able to kind of, hopefully they'll have some people that can step up and sort of replace that throughout this offseason. I look at Jordan Starch as well, like you said. Wait, how do you say his last name?
Strawn.
Jordan Strawn, I think he has potential to step up. I think he's a solid player, and maybe he can sort of make that impact that they're looking for.
Looking at linebacker, they lose to Marjorie Stanley, but they get 2 guys back that I really like. Brad Johnson, he was second on the team with 74 tackles. Mohamed Kaba, he's going to push for that starting job, had 32 tackles in his second year. Seems to be much further ahead than Sherrod Green. This is his 6th year as a senior here. He's been around forever. Israeli. Obviously, that much experience, that's obviously a plus for your football team, but I don't think he's going to be the starter for long. I think Kaba will eventually take over that role, and I think they got 2 solid linebackers here in a position that's really been a strong suit for this football team over the past couple of years.
Love Brad Johnson, 74 total tackles last year, 4 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, plus an interception and a fumble recovery. He's a super talented linebacker. Definitely a lot of people are sleeping on him. I think he has some serious talent. I look at Mohamed Kaba as well. I think he's solid, 2 tackles for loss, 32 total tackles, solid player across the board.
They also have Debo Williams, 6'1", 235. He could push for a starting job. Last time they had a player named Debo, well, he was elite for them, so maybe they can get something out of it. Though, is the secondary. They lose Jalen last year. They replaced him with a highly active safety in Devontae Reed from Central Michigan. He had 72 tackles a year ago. Cam Smith might be the nation's top corner. He had 3 picks, 11 pass breakups. It was a complete force in coverage. Nice length and explosiveness. I like Darius Rush. He plays on... I don't know. I like Darius Rush. R.J. Roderick, they're both seniors. David Spalding, he also made some good plays and could rotate in or step in when injuries occur. Quality depth with him. I love this secondary, Nick. They were 7th in the nation last year against the pass. Allowed only 250-plus yards twice last year. Once to Georgia when they got blown out, and then again when they blew out Florida. So this secondary is rock solid all year long. I think if they can improve in the trenches, this is going to be a very tough defense to throw on this year.
I love this secondary. I like how you highlight the depth there. Spalding, solid depth piece, 21 total tackles and an interception plus 3 pass breakups. And he's a depth player. Cam Smith, super talented, 11 pass breakups, 3 interceptions. I love what he can do, 41 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss. This secondary is so strong. A lot of people are kind of sleeping on it, very underrated. One of the nation's top secondaries, in my opinion. I know you agree with that. They're super talented across the board. They have a lot of guys with a lot of experience, and they bring in Reed, who comes in as a transfer and is a great pickup out of the portal. So I think this secondary will be very strong for this team, and the sky's the limit for them.
Looking at the schedule, preview, and prediction for South Carolina, Nick, we both agree this is a very good football team. I have them going 9-3. I think that they can win the East, but I think Georgia will lose September 17th. I think South Carolina, this is a great time to get them early on in the year. Georgia, obviously, they replaced a lot of players. They're reloading, but they're not going to have that continuity, especially on defense early on in the season. They want to get a handful of guys back, new guys at linebacker, some new players in the secondary and up front. That's the best time to get them. They're going to get them at home. Crowd's going to be rowdy. Spencer Rattler is a very talented quarterback. That's exactly who you want to have in a game like that. And I think September 10th, though, the week before, is just as important at Arkansas. The lack of pass rush for Arkansas, I think that's going to cause them issues. I like the way the secondary matches up as well, not just against Arkansas, but against Georgia as well. I do teams could give South Carolina some problems, but after that, whatever happens. But it's a good feel of how good this team will be this year in the first 2 tough matchups, really.
Right, I agree with you 100%. Getting Georgia week 3 is an absolute amazing draw for the South Carolina team. I think Georgia's a great football team. I think they're a great ball club. But I just worry that they won't be able to have all their ducks in a row with this new reloading defense, considering how much talent they lost in the NFL draft this year. I trust Kirby Smart. I know he's going to recruit well, and he has a lot of guys that are ready to go. But I just think by week 3, they might be caught off guard a little bit by the South Carolina team that I think is a little more polished and more put together, has a little more experience playing with each other. Look at the schedule top to bottom. I think it's very interesting. I think that the way it's built is very favorable to them. They have a lot of strong games at home Texas A&M, at home to Georgia, at home to Tennessee. I think those are all very nice draws for them. I think they definitely win the Tennessee game as well. I disagree with you, and I think they'll take care of Tennessee in the late part of the season. But 9-3 is definitely the floor for this team. I think the ceiling is 11-1. They could definitely win out in their conference play. I think the one loss that we can both agree on 100% is Clemson. I just think Clemson still dominates that rivalry.
Yeah, going on the road to play Clemson, they beat them 30-0 last year. The run game absolutely dominated them in South Carolina. That's a big issue for them. If they do not fix this run defense, that I think they will, because the defensive line is just too talented. They can easily lose 5 or 6 games. I think it could really disappoint if that run defense is not good. That's why I have them losing to Kentucky. Tennessee, I think the tempo and the balance will be too much for this defense that day. That will be another tough home game, though, for them. Texas A&M, they both play each other October 22nd. They both come off a bye week. I have them both coming off a loss, SC to Kentucky and A&M to Alabama. So that should be a very interesting game, Nick, especially if both teams are kind of in the hunt like we think they will. That's going to be a very interesting, cross-division contest. How do you see that one going?
I really like that game on October 22nd. This is a sort of a rivalry, I'm putting it in air quotes, that the SEC has tried to sort of create after A&M joined the conference. They needed an East-West rivalry opponent. There really wasn't one that would make sense historically. So they get South Carolina. Texas A&M has dominated this rivalry again, quote unquote. They haven't lost to South Carolina yet. I think this is the year that South Carolina finally gets the better of Texas A&M. I think they have the potential to do it this year with the roster. I think they're significantly better in some portions of the field. I like the fact that it comes off a bye. I think both teams can kind of regroup, get back together after tough losses potentially. But I do think South Carolina will beat Kentucky on October 8th.
Yeah, with that said, I have them going 9-3, finishing second in the division, but obviously a great head start if you can win Week 3 against Georgia. Do you have this team winning the East?
I do currently have them winning the East. I think they just have so much talent, and I think that Georgia will find themselves a little bit of trouble early on, and then head-to-head will really come back to haunt them from losing Week 1. I think that they have enough talent to beat Kentucky on the road right now, because Kentucky just hasn't fully proved to me yet. I think Tennessee, while I think they're a great team, I think Tennessee is definitely a team to watch in the East. I think at home, with the way it's going to be late in the season, how Spencer Rattler should be firing on all cylinders, I think Tennessee will just be a little outmatched by South Carolina, and I can see them winning, going unbeaten in conference play, but I have them losing to Clemson, which would be a very interesting look if they end up the SEC title game with a single loss out of conference to Clemson.
Yeah, I think 9+ wins regardless, would be great for this team considering the schedule. That's going to be it for today's episode, guys. Nick, as always, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Make sure you guys subscribe. See you next time.